Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Clark.
And I'm David Johnson.
We both are educators by career, and Chris still transitional shifts, and just going to be educators, right? So we're going to be presenting to you a bit of information on the historical overview of Juneteenth. The nuts and bolts. There's a lot about this particular federal holiday that came to its own in June 2021. But we felt that what you're going to now hear is a little bit about its origin, where it really was, what really are some things that we were taught, not accurately, that really opened our eyes, opened both of our eyes, as we did this presentation and research. And more so how the migration of the Juneteenth cultural importance migrated from Texas to the United States through Washington.
During the presentation, if you have any questions, just stop and ask us.
We will try to answer as best we can. So this is going to be the layout. The Emancipation Proclamation has a part to play in this. The birth of Juneteenth originated through the General Order number 3. Quick question, does anyone know what General Order number 3 is? Then the early transitions of Juneteenth started in 1865 to the grandmother Juneteenth, who actually brought 1.5 million signatures to our president, and it became the law. And I think before I want to springboard is that I think one important thing I want to say about this overall plea is to remember that you're never too old to have a dream and make it happen. Because this woman really inspired me. And you're going to see why she inspired you. She's coming to the end. I'm just going to let you know she's coming to the end. Okay, we can put this so video. Yeah. We're going to give you a brief overview of Juneteenth shared by a professor. Catch up to the background.
My name is Marcia Chapman. I'm a professor of history and
Everybody here?
studies at Georgetown University. I'm a historian of African American life. Juneteenth is a commemoration holiday of June 19, 1865, when a group of African Americans in Galveston, Texas, received the news that they indeed were free. President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, but news of the end of slavery in Texas had not traveled to until 1865. Since then, Juneteenth has been a day of commemoration of the struggle against slavery and a celebration of freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth is that people often think that was the day that slavery ended in the United States. But in fact, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, was passed in the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. Although Juneteenth celebrates acknowledge that slavery had ended, it's important to remember that conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Jim Crow, the suppression of civil rights, or continued struggles to fight racism, those continued long after the end of slavery. And so the Juneteenth holiday reminds us of where we come, and it also inspires us to think about the places we come from. As African Americans left the South to pursue opportunities throughout the 20th century in northern and western cities, the celebration of Juneteenth moved from being a Texas-based celebration to a national one, in which people gathered with families and friends and community to remember the incredible struggle of the people against slavery and to create new traditions that allow them to reflect about the struggle for civil rights and the ongoing struggle against racism. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, the fight for civil rights has continued to the present day. So Juneteenth provides people with a sense of encouragement and inspiration to continue to fight on behalf of their community allows people to look back at the past and encourages them to learn more about African American history. As more and more institutions recognize Juneteenth and work to commemorate the incredible legacy of slavery in the United States, I hope Juneteenth becomes a day where people commit not only to acts of justice in their local community, but to investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way.
So that was a brief overview of just Juneteenth, but let's just kind of gather it all together. So Juneteenth originated in Galveston, Texas, and it actually had many names in the past as a holiday. Emancipation Day, there's a reason why it was called that. Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Black Independence Day, Juneteenth, Independence Day. But basically, it's celebrated on June 19th, and the reason why June 19th is significant is that that's going to be getting back to General Granger and this particular General Number 3 clause that came into effect. I think one important thing that I want everyone to remember that in history we were taught that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, and actually that's not what it did. The Confederate states that were affected by that only were affected by that because they did not have the invasion of the Union troops. So you had a split state that has some Black Americans that were free based upon this, and it was received, and then you had some states that didn't receive it at all. Texas happens to be one of the 5 states as a 2-year delay that did not equate the Emancipation Proclamation. So another bit of powerful punch had to come into play to allow these Galveston Americans to be set free by legal law. Next slide. We all are. So today for Juneteenth, it recognizes the intellectual aspect, and that means the narratives. The narratives are what keeps any historical point of interest alive and well. And that's what Juneteenth has done over the years. We understand the reason why it happened. We understand the reason what didn't happen. We understand the reason why it's still now practiced as a springboard for, again, equality, again, for voice, again, for education, and again, for building communities. I found some really interesting things that in our African Museum now in Washington, D.C., they have a whole section now on Juneteenth. And it linked Juneteenth to the early beginnings of ancestry, of trying to find everyone's families where everybody came from. Because everybody migrated out from Texas and went elsewhere, and everybody started splitting, intermarrying. So here, I like the way that even the Smithsonian has brought it down to condensation, that families of multiracial ethnicity are able to find that, which is the whole point, to come together and reflect upon our uniqueness and what we all have in common.
I want to talk a little bit more about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it's important, you can go to the next slide, it's important to, just like Rebecca mentioned, to know exactly what it did and what it did not do. There was a very big victory that the Union Army won, very big, in 1862, and from that victory, President Lincoln issued a decree first. It wasn't the proclamation, but it was going in. The decree was to the southern states, hey, we won a really big victory over you. Here's what we want. We want you to free your slaves. We want you to free the slaves, but we'll pay you. The Union, the federal government said, we'll pay you to free your slaves. If you do not comply, not only do we want you to free your slaves, but we want you to come back to the Union, a confederacy of the southern states who succeeded. We want you back in the Union. We want slavery then. We'll pay you for those slaves. So the federal government was wanting the Union forces, that's what they want to do. The Confederacy said no. And the next threat was, Abraham issued this, if you say no, then we'll just free your slaves. We'll just proclaim them free on a decree, a proclamation. And so no reply from the Confederacy, so January 1, that's what Lincoln did. He He freed the slaves in the Confederacy only. He was a politician at the end of the day. He did not free the slaves in slave-loving states that was still with the Union. So those were those border states. I'm going to explain this cartoon picture in just a moment, but those are those border states. And that was an irony, because he said, okay, you freed the slaves in the Confederacy, but you did not in the Union states, in states that are controlled by the Union. Why? And it was because he was trying to play the game of politics. You have these states that were for the Union, but they wanted to keep their slaves. So he didn't want to antagonize those states. By freeing them slaves, he didn't want them to succeed. He wanted to keep them in the Union, as well as use their military power, as well as agriculture. So this comment is, the slave represents the Union slaves. And he's like, you guys are still enslaved and you're kind of sick, but you know, there's some emancipation coming. Here, just drink from this bowl here. It's coming, but not right now. Abraham Lincoln eventually would fight for the passage of the 13th Amendment, which would free everyone. And so he knew what he was doing, but it just didn't look like that at first. So next slide. Here is, so the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the Confederacy only. And it actually really didn't free them necessarily, because the Confederacy didn't care about the proclamation. Oh yeah? It means nothing to us. Those slaves are not free. And so the only way they would actually be free is upon Union victories. So as the Union came down, as they fought, any state that lost a battle, any territory that lost a battle, and became the Union's confiscated property, which they could consider property, you know, so you have to fight for it.
So are those states, those border?
These are the border states. Yep. Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware. Let's see, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware. These states still held slaves, but they were for the Union. And when the Confederacy was formed, they would not secede with the Confederacy, even though they wanted their slaves. They kept their slaves, but they didn't.
No, that's Jack Black, not Black Jack. She wasn't even after me, you know. I don't know what it comes. How did this discourage them from supporting yourself?
Well, England and France had abolished slavery centuries before America. America was late to the game, and England, 60 years. History in here, right? History. England and France have gotten tired of slavery a long time ago. Well, 60. Well, not 60. That's a long time ago.
They still transported slaves.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they still brought in they still fostered the slave trade. And what's really interesting about this too is that Texas, a lot of plantation owners actually uprooted and moved to Texas because Texas had no way of permitting or preventing any further slave trade because it wasn't being monitored. So it really allowed Texas to really grow more in their housing of slaves, the practicing of slave trade itself. That's one reason why it was a really big issue, and to the reason why this next important document had to come into effect directly.
And it's interesting enough that the Emancipation Proclamation allowed the slaves and encouraged them, hey, leave your state and come join the army, join the Union side. And this is just an added point that I thought was funny. The Confederacy also offered slaves that, hey, join the Confederacy, and by the end, maybe we'll set you free, maybe, if you fight. And so that was really interesting. Okay, and so marching back with what Rebecca had said earlier, there were no actual major Union victories in Texas. And so remember, the only way the Emancipation Proclamation was actually enacted was you had to have a victory. You have to fight for it. Union had to gain victories, and there was no real big thing happening in Texas. And so when this proclamation came, many of the slaves still in Texas, you know, unless the Union forces were there fighting for them and fighting to implement the actual proclamation, no wonder we didn't hear about it. They didn't hear about it. And so people in Texas informed that, and so you had General Granger, who comes, I believe, 2 years after the actual proclamation. He arrives with troops, and he issues this order. People in Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. The connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and free laborers. And so this order was finally the first time in which the proclamation 2 years prior was actually enforced, because you had Union forces there to do it. And so with the proclamation came freedom to the slaves. They became, instead of property, they are now free laborers. Employers, free laborers, so the relationship between the slave masters changed. Now with that being said, this ushers in a period after the Civil War called the Reconstruction, and which was really still a hard time for slaves. And this employer free that comes to bear in this next slide. Actually, that's the before. Go back. Really big. Oh no, forward. Yeah, right here. Really big. This is interesting that this is the general order ends with the free laborer, because after the South loses, you get a period of Reconstruction, and what comes with that is southern states still wanting to really hold power over slaves, over former slaves. And so you get the creation of what is called Jim Crow laws.
Well, they were called black laws first.
Black codes.
Black codes, yeah.
Which are, before they were called Jim Crow, black codes, which are actual state laws both spoken and unspoken, because some of them were fiat, just made up by townships, that restricted blacks in general, but it was mostly, as from my research, mostly it restricted the black laborer. And really, in a way, keep the black laborer enslaved to the master. There were codes like you couldn't do a certain job, and if you did, you had to pay a fine. And so you couldn't be an artisan, for example. An artisan, you had to pay $10 to $100 a year to do that. The only jobs you could do was, get this, work on a plantation, work as a farmer, which is what many blacks did in slavery, and to do anything else would lead to fines, even beatings, and unpaid work. So that varies. So that's some of the natural thing that black comes involved, but they also involve restrictions. Can't be out at a certain time of day. As a black man, I definitely couldn't be here, teaching, and there's so many restrictions, which kind of leads to how are you going to have the Juneteenth holiday if we all can't celebrate at certain times. Rebecca, you want to talk about
I
that?
can definitely do that. So,
Next.
next slide. So I allude to that, knowing that even though the General Number 3 came into effect, knowing that there were black codes that still suppressed the freedoms that the black Texans were and all rights entitled to, they still were limited by the man-made laws of the time. So basically, Juneteenth still existed. So the next year, on June 19th in 1866, the first June meeting was held in Galveston. And so I'm letting you know what these initial meetings looked like. As you can see here, they had community outreach, parades, cookouts, prayer gatherings, historical reading, and 3 they read Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation as a cultural reading because they really felt very empowered by this piece of legislation for them being something worthy to be shared. But also, it's all about musical celebration. As you can see here, people dressed up in their Sunday go meet clothes because they took pride in their freedom. Gatherings, and you can see this is definite generational difference between this group of people to this group of people. Musical, instrumental was being held. Wagons were decorated. Horses, women were dressed like the goddess of the United States of America. So the Black Americans really felt such great pride in having this particular freedom aspect in their country or in their state recognized. But the downside was that with these restrictions in place, how do you celebrate your freedom? But you only celebrate your freedom at a certain time of the day. So here's the religious connection to the church. Reverend Jack Yates, who is centered right here, this property still exists in Galveston, Texas, now a historical monument, thought of a way that even though we cannot find a safe place to have our meetings to celebrate our newfound freedom, knowing that we can still buy land. So back, because of the 14th Amendment, property males could buy land. So he thought of the idea of buying land and have a central located place to have the Juneteenth events. From that sprung off the word Emancipation Park. So the first Emancipation Park was in Galveston, Texas, in 1872, held and led by Reverend Yates, who was just, again, a formerly freed black slave himself. And from that, we see the spin-off through history that Emancipation Parks went viral. Once everybody started migrating, you're going to hear about Emancipation Parks going up everywhere. But the first Emancipation Park was where everybody met, celebrated, sung, cookout, whatever they did on that day was on that day and in that moment. Everybody was safe and no one felt fear of the law. Next one. One other thing about Juneteenth as it migrates again from 1890 to 1865 is that there's a lot of cultural aspects that has sped over to our culture, and even that has gone even from different African cultures, the Benin, and I know I'm not pronouncing these, Congo, wherever the original slaves entered into the States, United States, a lot of this cultural connection was also from their culture from Africa. So here we find a lot of traditional meals that we celebrate, the fried chicken, the ribs, but one important thing that I want to bring to your attention is that the color red was a symbolism here. And red was a symbolization of not forgetting the blood that was shed for the loss of the freedom of many, many lives. So one important spin-off that we contribute the red velvet cake, the watermelon punch, and then the other thing that's red, even the red we're wearing right now, is a remembrance or commemorative idea of thinking where we've come from and how far we're still coming. Again, the black eyed peas, the whole peas, the chili, it became a major event. Keeping in mind that here, even though Jim Crow laws came into effect, we now added preachers and educators to the celebration part. Not only did we not just have our own thing in our community, we're now bringing in the church. The church slowly comes in and becomes a significant part of the celebration. Not just only in Galveston, Texas, but for anyone that migrated out, they pull the church in as a place of safety and a place of worship. Next one.
And that's kind of what you just said. As people, as blacks migrated from Texas, they took Juneteenth with them, and that's why it's why we're doing it today. It's reached North Carolina, and now we also know it's become a federal holiday.
Next one. As I alluded to you before, Opal Lee, who has had a famous quote, I have to tell you that none of us are free until we all are free. So this 89-year-old woman, I'm going to let the video speak for itself, had a dream and it came to fruition. And now we have this legal holiday, the 13th federal holiday, that came to its own in June 2021.
this Sunday, and this, of course, comes after President. The U.S. is gearing up to mark Juneteenth this Sunday, and this, of course, comes after President Biden made June 19th a federal holiday last year. But there's one woman who made it her mission to see the job through. Nicole Killian traveled to Fort Worth, Texas, to talk with 95-year-old Opal Lee, who many consider the grandmother of Juneteenth.
I wanted this book, this is really tasty, but she did this at 89.
At 95 years young, living that way, Opal Lee shows no signs of slowing down. Her life story has become legendary for her unwavering mission as the grandmother of Juneteenth.
At what point did you decide that you wanted Juneteenth to be a national holiday?
I felt like I hadn't done enough. I was 89 years old when I got to thinking about it. I just
So it wasn't until then, it wasn't until 89.
I was old as dirt. I decided that maybe if a little lady, 89 years old, in tennis shoes, walking from Fort Worth to Washington, somebody would pay attention.
And they did when she started Opal's Walk, trekking 2.5 miles at a time. For the 2.5 years it took for General Gordon Granger to arrive in Texas and inform enslaved black people of their freedom after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865. She delivered 1.5 million signatures to Congress, clinching victory when legislation passed last year.
The bill is passed.
President Biden at the White House, establishing Juneteenth National Independence Day.
What do you think of when you look at that pen?
That it has done so much for freedom.
Long before the former school teacher and mother of 4 launched a national campaign, her recognition of Juneteenth came at an early age.
When I was a little one and we lived in Marshall, Texas, we'd go to the fairground. There'd be games and food and food and food. I'm here to tell you, it was like Christmas.
But June 19th wasn't always a celebratory occasion. In 1939, when Opal was 12 years old, her family moved to a home at this corner in Fort Worth that was torched by a white mob.
The paper says there was some 500 folk who gathered. They drove the furniture out and burned it. Burned the house too. My parents never, ever talked to us about it. Not ever.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. They accepted what had happened.
Acceptance, but for her mother, not defeat.
After that house was destroyed,
We got broad backs, baby.
she worked untiringly till she got another. I say that maybe I got my tenacity from her. I've got a long way to go.
That tenacity is now driving Opal to erect a new national museum on her own land dedicated to telling the story of Juneteenth.
People think it's a black thing when it's not. It's not a Texas thing. It's not that. Juneteenth means freedom. And I mean for everybody.
For those who come after you, what do you want them to know when they hear the name Opal Lee?
I want them to know that the little old lady dreamed, and they can dream too, and that dreams can come to fruition.
In Fort Worth, Texas, Nicole Killian, CBS News.
story in her life and realized at 89, the feat that she was doing is the reason why she did what she did. It was the most inspiring. As a matter of fact, it could shut my mouth. I am without excuse never to say I can't do it. And I hope that that's one thing that you have left in this presentation. That there's no age, there's no color, there's nothing that you're not you're passionate about. And I definitely want to bring to your attention that in May of 18th of this year, her portrait, which was painted by the artist Jess Coleman, now hangs in the Texas Congress House. She's the second and only painting there in honor of what she's done for the state of Texas. But even more so, Juneteenth and Opal's vision lives on, next slide. That don't get hung up on it being a federal holiday, everybody gets a day off on Monday. The significance I think sometimes that we can lose with holidays is that, okay, well, it doesn't really connect to me, but it connects to me really. And not to take the moment to be still and reflect upon the why it does connect, you really lose to understand the reason why it came to it. That's one reason why this holiday, in my opinion, needs to be commemorated like all other holidays, like all of the events, the Holocaust, like other types of crises that we've had. But again, the most common thing that this particular holiday brings to life for all of us is how from tragedy, I use the word the phoenix, rise into actions, victories. Because of her great faith, because of what she saw her parents not retaliate, the blessing has come forward for this holiday. And God has blessed the nation, and we're all being blessed by it. Thank you so much for listening.